Well, thank you very much, Julian. One of the true great innovators, entrepreneurs and champions of our industry. And I know I speak on behalf of everybody in the room when I say how grateful we are for everything that you've done for our industry over the years and continue to do so. So thank you to you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak at this very distinguished forum. I've been coming to these lunches for around a year now, so I'm a bit of a latecomer. But these lunches are always a good reminder to me of what's happening in the real world, because my world is largely dominated by politics, by the media, by activists, and did I mention politics? And it's good to get out and hear what's going on in the real world, and the stories that we get every month here are generally stories about risk and success and hope and opportunity, and they're very inspiring, and I always look forward to coming along. So it's great to finally get a chance to have a go myself, and hopefully I can walk in the footsteps of those before me. As Julian alluded to, earlier this week, the Premier was at the Maules Creek mine, Whitehaven's great project out there near Gunnedah, and I saw Tony Haggerty here earlier today, and I'm sure he will agree it was a great event, and it was terrific to see the Premier out there opening the mine, standing side by side with the men and women working on site, the many hundreds of local jobs being provided, the investment and opportunity that's now going into that region, which is now a beacon of economic opportunity for so many businesses and so many people and families across that part of our state. And it's a project that is in many ways symbolic of some of the issues that we've faced as an industry over the past few years, and also a demonstration of how, as an industry, we're able to rise to those challenges. It's a project which has gone through a lengthy and bureaucratic approvals process at state and federal level. It's been subject to many of the vagaries of our legal system. It's a coal project, of course, a greenfields coal project, with all the additional issues that sort of project can bring. And as a result, it's a project that has been quite recklessly and irresponsibly targeted by a small group of activists, and in many cases militant activists, who've sought to stop the project from proceeding, putting themselves and others at terrible danger from time to time as well. And yet, despite all those challenges, despite all those issues, it's a project that has been delivered here in New South Wales ahead of schedule and under budget. And that is a terrific credit to Tony and his team, the entire Whitehaven team, but it's also a demonstration of what our industry here in New South Wales is capable of, even as we've faced tough times, even as we face adversity. So it was a great event, and it was terrific to see the Premier there, and it's one of the best parts of my job is actually getting out from behind my desk and visiting the mining regions of this state, and particularly to see a new greenfields project getting into production is a great day for us. As you know, there's a state election next month, and it's a timely opportunity for me to use the time I have today to give you a bit of an assessment of the performance of our political representatives of the government, the opposition, of our parliament over the past 4 years, to lay out some of our policy priorities, as I see it as an industry, for the next term of government, and to outline some of the things that we're doing at the Minerals Council on behalf of the industry to secure those policy commitments to protect and to promote our sector. But first, some election context to set the scene a little. You'll often hear politicians say they don't read the polls, and the only poll that matters is the poll on election day. How many times have we heard that one? I've certainly heard it a lot in my time in politics. But that's all complete rubbish. Of course they read the polls. I've never met a politician that wouldn't break down a door to read a poll. So it's probably a good opportunity now, as we approach the election, to show you some of the polling that we've done, the community views of our sector, because ultimately the policies that our politicians set for our sector are influenced as much by what they think people think about our sector as to what they think is needed. And this first slide is from a a poll that we do every year. It's a fairly intense piece of research so we can get an idea of what the community actually thinks of our sector, as opposed to what people are always telling us the community thinks of our sector. And it may be a surprise to some of you to see that, very pleasingly from my perspective, when you ask people whether they support or oppose mining in New South Wales, for the past 3 years that level of support has been remarkably consistent and, in my view, remarkably high. Those are opinion poll results that any political party would be envious of, at 70% support. That's a landslide of epic proportions if you look at it in those terms. So it is useful in that context, in the context of an election, when we're going to hear a lot of heat and noise and claims and agitation from some about our sector, that we all hear from time to time, about to see just what the people out there actually more broadly think about our sector. Set of results from the same poll probably explains to a large extent why people support our sector and our industry and our people, because they think it's important to the country. Almost universally they think it's important to the country. Almost universally they think it's important to the state and to regional New South Wales as well. And a reasonably healthy majority think that it's important to Sydney too, which is pleasing from our perspective, because we've put a lot of time and effort into trying to get our message into Western Sydney in particular about the relevance of mining to people, even though they might not live. The last slide on polling that I want to show you is probably the most important one in the context of the election, and that is how mining issues affect the way people vote. And you can see the question that was asked at the bottom of the slide. Would you be more or less likely to vote for a party that supported the growth of the minerals mining sector? Or would it make no difference to your vote? And if you just look at the top dark blue bar, which is the summary of the results for everybody that responded, you'll see that the number of people that said it would make them more likely and the number of people who said it would make them less likely pretty much cancels each other out, and around 2/3 are saying it would make no difference. So a politically neutral result in terms of changing votes and voting intention. But if you look at the green and the lighter blue bars, that's where it gets particularly interesting in the context of the state election, because the lighter blue bar represents those who had indicated they were coalition voters when they responded to the survey, and the green bar represents those who are soft voters, the voters that the parties like to chase, the undecided voters, the swinging voters, those who may change their vote. And you can see from those two sets of results, in those particularly important cohorts of voters, the more likely are bigger than the less likely. So from that perspective, being seen to support the mining industry, as long as it's done responsibly, is a political positive. And it should be seen as a political positive by the coalition government seeking to retain the voters that it won over at the last state election, and it should be seen as a political positive in the context of those soft voters that both major parties will be chasing at the next state election. And I can assure you that these polling results are communicated to the political parties by us. They're well aware of them. We make them available to them, and we try and ensure that they have as good an understanding of these numbers as we do. Next, I want to talk about what's been happening over the last 4 years, and then I'll talk about some of the things we've been doing. And I think it's fair to say, I should say from the outset, before I have a bit of a go at some of our elected officials, that there are some terrific mining region MPs right across the state, and we deal with them every day. Good, decent, hard-working local representatives, particularly from the mining regions of the Hunter and the Central West and the West and the Illawarra, but right across the state, right across the parties, who know their responsibility representing their mining communities, who understand our issues and do what they can to help. And there's some great ministers in the government who know us, who know the importance of our sector and are trying to do the right thing. by the state, and there are also some great shadow ministers doing the same as well. There's some great people working in the departments and agencies that we deal with every day who also understand us and are trying to do the right thing and deliver good outcomes for the state. But having said that, it's also fair to say that the last 4 years have been a period of disappointment, of frustration, of missed opportunity, of bad policy outcomes. And it pains me to say it, given my background, having worked in the coalition government and worked on that side of politics, that this coalition government sadly has let us down. They've let us down. And I guess when you look at the general political climate when they were elected 4 years ago, it does explain a little why that may be the case. We had a federal government still in power then that seemed to take great joy in attacking our industry, whether it be through the rhetoric of the then Treasurer, Mr Swan, or remember him? Remember that guy? No. He wrote a book, something, I think. Or whether it be through their policy settings on the carbon tax and the mining tax and others, whether there be their attacks on the so-called big polluters. That obviously set a very bad example which coloured the view that many had towards our industry, a very difficult period. And here in New South Wales, as you well know, we've also had a very difficult period in relation to the coal seam gas industry, an industry that Minerals Council does not represent, but we do pay close attention to their issues because we support the resources sector more broadly, and also their issues are our issues as well in relation to policy and regulation particularly. And as Julian alluded to earlier, we've had the legacy issues from ICAC investigations that have been linked to the coal industry and quite unfairly, in my view, associated with the industry more broadly. So that's a bit of the general political context, but more specifically in relation to the coalition government. They were elected, as you will recall, with a very healthy majority, lots of new MPs, lots of unexpected, inexperienced new members of Parliament who needed to develop an appreciation of how to distinguish between what the community thinks and what 10 emails in their office means. Similarly, a general lack of understanding across the government regarding the importance of our industry to the economy and to regional New South Wales in particular, something that we've had to address over the past 3 years. So a difficult political scenario, and the policy outcomes have been difficult for us in turn. We've had a planning system made dysfunctional, now broken, failing our state, failing our industry, and certainly failing many of the people that work or sadly used to work in our sector. That planning system is our number one problem and our number one priority. We've had new and increased fees, taxes, charges and levies placed on our industry. Unfortunately, we've been seen as a cash cow, an easy target, a source of revenue, and the worst case of that was the second budget delivered by the coalition, where we had a midnight ambush of $80 million of new fees, taxes, charges and levies imposed upon us without any warning, any consultation. One hell of a shock, which we hope won't happen again. But that's indicative of what's been happening on fees and charges on our industry across the board. Last year we had the mine subsidence levy increased by 35%, from $20 million to $27 million in one go. The mine safety levy as well continues to increase, and it's indicative of a pattern, unfortunately, from a government which claims to want to lower taxes. So it's something that is of great concern to us, particularly as we struggle with the business conditions that we face. And as Julian mentioned earlier too, the land access arrangements have become very, very problematic for our sector, and that spells big trouble in the long term for our state. Our explorers should be celebrated and encouraged for the risks that they take on behalf of the entire community. You all know that in this room. These are the great risk takers of our industry, and we should be supporting them. unfortunately, we've got to a situation where they seem too often to be denigrated and seen as a bit of a political liability by governments, by this government, rather than the people who are going to generate the long-term economic growth that our state and our regional communities need. Those land access arrangements have become complicated, overly bureaucratic and legalistic, and in particular the mooted changes to the arbitration system in New South Wales has the potential to scare further exploration investment away. But to the credit of the government, I have to give them some credit. I mean, they have got some things right, and I'll talk a bit more about some recent developments in a moment, but they did try and change the planning system. They did try and replace the broken planning system with a new planning system, and we supported that. The new system wasn't perfect. We weren't entirely happy with it, but they did try, and they were blocked in the Parliament by the Labor Party. And that brings me to the Labor Party. It's difficult to make an assessment of the Labor Party because we don't really know what many of their policies are, and I'm sure that they'll be rolling them out in due course in the lead up to the election, and we'll be following them very closely. We've got a good relationship with the Labor Party, as we do with the coalition government, and I know they're aware of our issues, and after all, when you think about the history of the Labor Party and where it came from, representing working people and particularly the mining workers of the Hunter and beyond in the Illawarra, you'd hope that they will continue that tradition under their new leader, Luke Foley. But it was the Labor Party that blocked the planning system reforms in the Parliament and chose to play politics on that issue rather than deliver a good policy outcome for our industry and for the community and for the economy and for the state. So that's a black mark against them, and they know that that's how we feel. And we have, in the end, a Labor Party, because of the drubbing they took at the last state election, which has only a handful of MPs from outside of Sydney. And those regional MPs, I imagine and I know, would struggle to make sure that they have their voices heard in caucus on behalf of their regional communities. The caucus, which is dominated by inner city MPs, and a party that seems unable to decide exactly what it stands for and who it wants to represent here in New South Wales, whether it's going to chase the inner city sort of green tinge, leafy suburbs vote and defend itself against the Greens in inner city, or whether they're going to represent regional communities and the working people of regional New South Wales. And it has been said to me in a meeting with a very senior member of the Labor's parliamentary leadership team that they know that they won't win government in New South Wales until they have a policy platform that enables them to win the seat of Balmain and the seat of Bathurst. Now, it's a pretty difficult juggling act for them to try and achieve, and they're a long way from that. So we've had 4 years of essentially a policy failure from both sides, parliamentary wrangling, and the policy settings for our government, for our industry from government, sadly have gone backwards. And what does this look like? I mean, what is the result of all this? What does it look like for New South Wales? Well, it's fine for me to give you my personal political assessment of what's been going on. I could talk about it for hours if you let me. But the reality is these decisions, these policy outcomes have significant implications for our state, for our economy, for our people. And you can see on the screen the results of the latest Fraser Institute survey, and I'm hoping that some of you in this room are familiar with the Fraser Institute survey, survey of global mining industry executives. I think they surveyed nearly 900 executives around the globe, asked them their perceptions of mining jurisdictions as a destination for mining investment. And you can see from those results just how badly New South Wales was performing in the last survey. We're due for a new one soon, and hopefully we've improved our position. But those results show that we're coming last. We're the least attractive state for mining investment, according to that survey. And in Victoria, they mine brown mud and call it coal, and yet they're ahead of us. And it pains me to see Queensland doing so well as well. But those numbers are even worse when you consider that when this coalition government was elected, New South Wales was ranked 20th, and now we're ranked 39th. So something has gone terribly wrong somewhere for us to slide so far down that ranking, and we need to turn it around and turn it around quickly. mean, what that you're not seen as an attractive investment destination, you don't get the investment. And you can see that over that corresponding period, in mining capital investment in our state has more than halved. Now, obviously, some of that is driven by market conditions, obviously, but that has been happening over a period where mining investment in other states, particularly in Queensland and Western Australia, has been increasing. So, again, these are the ramifications of getting the policy settings wrong, of having public posture that doesn't look like it welcomes mining in this state. Exploration activity, obviously a critical area of activity for the long-term economic future of our state. Many of you would be very familiar with what's been happening there because you live and breathe it every day. Again, falling. This is a very concerning trend for the long-term future of our industry, particularly for the big minerals mining projects that we need to start developing now before our major gold and copper and other projects in the west of the state start running out of their minerals deposits in the next 10 years or so. And that is very concerning. And probably the most concerning one from a human perspective is the 25,000 coal miners of New South Wales shrinking to 20,000 over the past 2.5 years, with 2,500 of those people in the Hunter alone losing their jobs. And that's 1 in 5 people. When I started this job, there were 25,000 coal miners alone. That's just coal. And now there's only 20,000 of them. And again, a lot of that has been driven by market conditions and business conditions and companies responding to that as they must. But some of it, there's no doubt some of it's been driven by the policy settings of this government. And we saw late last year the very lowest ebb for our industry, I hope, when a project which was told by the assessment panel that it would meet all the environmental requirements of the assessment process was refused, the Drayton South project anyway. And this is the human face of policy failure, in my view. 500 families in despair. And when that happened, we had been working very hard to help that project and those workers secure their future, as we do. But when that happened, we went into overdrive as an industry association, because what had happened there was symbolic of the risk to everybody in our sector under the planning system and under the policy settings that we've been operating under. We went into overdrive with the government, we went into overdrive with our advertising, with our advocacy, to give those people the voice that they needed to make their views and their concerns heard. And it was a very, very tough time, a very emotional time, particularly on site, as you can imagine, particularly for them to read about it in the Daily Telegraph before being told about it officially. It was a terrible, terrible week for our industry. But I believe it was a wake-up call for the New South Wales government. After all, the planning department had recommended approval. All the departments and agencies of the state government had recommended the project be approved, and yet the Planning Assessment Commission decided to go solo and reject the project. So that was a big wake-up call for the government. And in the wake of that decision, I was able to take a delegation of senior industry representatives to meet with the Premier. And this was in November last year. And it was a crisis meeting. It was a crisis meeting. We'd had enough. What had happened on the Drayton project had confirmed all our fears about the implications of failed policy. And it also confirmed the warnings that we'd been giving to the state government over at least 2 years about what was going to happen when the full impact of their planning system failure started to be felt. And we went in and saw the Premier, and we had a very full and frank discussion with the Premier and made him aware of how difficult the policies of his government were making us dealing with the tough times that we're in more generally. And he accepted the message. He accepted the message, and he took it on board. And there are now some promising signs that we're going to get a fair go, and we're going to get a fair hearing, in my view. We're not asking for special treatment We're not asking for any sort of rescue package or any of that sort of thing. We just want a fair go so we can put our case and have our projects and our industry assessed on their merits. And a really positive development following that meeting was the Premier coming to our industry conference in November last year and speaking at the dinner. And he made a very important speech, in my view, for the future of our industry. And in that speech, some of you in the room here today were there, you'll remember in that speech, he made an admission that the government's performance had not been good enough. He accepted the need for a better approach in the future, and he made a commitment, a personal commitment, that things would get better, that he would improve things in the next term of government. And it was a very important demonstration of public support from the highest level of government for our sector, in much the same way his attendance at the Maules Creek opening was on Tuesday. And the commitments that he made in relation to halving planning assessment timeframes, in tightening up the deterrent regime for illegal access and for finalising some of the policy settings in relation to our sector were very welcome, and we're working with the government to ensure those commitments are kept. But what policies broadly are we looking for from our government and from the alternative government the next state election? Because we've seen some recent progress. We've seen the Premier from the top down send a signal through the government that enough is enough and things need to get better. And that is all very welcome, but it means nothing unless we see some commitments after the next state election. We need the Premier's fine words and initial good deeds turned into further reform to help our sector through the tough times and to ensure we're placed to take advantage of the future. So there's a number of key areas of policy that we are seeking commitments from the government and the opposition in the context of the state election. And I just want to touch on them briefly, because we'll be talking more about them in the weeks ahead. But this is not an exhaustive list of policy priorities for the industry by any means, but these are our priorities in the context of the election, and these are the general commitments that we'll be seeking from both sides of politics. And just quickly going through them, obviously, I've spoken a lot about the planning system. It's our number one problem, it's our number one priority. We need to ensure the Premier is able to meet his commitment, or alternatively, and we also would like a bipartisan similar commitment from the opposition, so the politics get taken out of the planning system and we get significant real reform to improve the process for everyone. We need better infrastructure and services in mining regions. For too long our mining regions have been shortchanged. They haven't got a fair go. Those of you that come from mining regions or spend a lot of time there will know that. And we've been fighting very hard over the past 3 years to help improve the quality of infrastructure and services in our mining regions. The government has a very good program called the Resources for Regions program, which has, over the past 4 years, committed over $200 million for infrastructure and some services in some mining regions across the state. That program needs to be expanded, needs to be additional funding invested into that, and the eligibility criteria need to be expanded so more mining regions can be included. Regions, for example, like Gunnedah, which currently can't participate because they're not deemed to be a mining region, which is absurd. So better infrastructure and services which will improve the quality of life for our people who work in our industry. Exploration and land access, as I've touched on already, we are going backwards there. The policy parameters are too restrictive, they're too bureaucratic, they're becoming too expensive, and we need access arrangements that are simple and fair for everyone. We need access arrangements that reflect the more than 3,500 land access agreements that are currently in place, that have been negotiated by our explorers in good faith, with respect, with little fuss. We need access arrangements that reflect that reality, rather than access arrangements that seek to reflect the very small handful of cases that can't be resolved. And when I say very small, I'm talking about less than 10. The very small number of cases that go to arbitration. And when these cases do go to arbitration, the arbitration process, again, it should be fair, should be quick, should be consistent, and it should minimise the legal costs. And I worry about the direction that our arbitration system is likely to go, given some of the policy commitments that we've seen from the New South Wales government on that front. Stronger protection from illegal access, safety risks. We've seen, particularly in relation to the Maules Creek site, but also at other sites across the state and mining region infrastructure in the Hunter, rail infrastructure particularly, stupid people doing dangerous things to try and make their point. And it's a threat to the safety of those people, and it's of course a threat to the safety and well-being of our people on site. And you know, the men and women of our industry going to work every day to put food on the table should not have to put up with that sort of nonsense every day. It should not be happening, particularly the repeated illegal access, trespassing and dangerous acts that have been going on up near Maules Creek, and next week we're going to see another explosion of it as they continue their campaign. What we're talking about is generally a very small number of people, repeat offenders, in many cases militant activists who are continually flouting the law. They think it's fun, they think it's a game. Someone's going to get killed before too long, because we've seen people tampering with equipment, people tampering with explosives, people blockading access gates, people intimidating mine workers, ramming vehicles. This is not peaceful protest in Kumbaya in the forest anymore. This is quite serious, and we need a regime in New South Wales that acts as an effective deterrent and not just giving people a slap on the wrist and off you go. And we also need a change to the workplace health and safety arrangements so that mine operators are not responsible for the idiotic acts of stupid people who choose to break the law. They should be responsible for their own actions. Best practice service delivery, taxation and regulation. We should get that anyway, and we are seeing some significant improvements in the way the New South Wales government interacts with the industry, and we should give credit for that. But importantly, in relation to environmental regulation, we need environmental regulations for our industry that reflect science, facts and evidence, and not some of the overblown claims that we get from time to time about the impact of our industry. We are an industry that operates under some of the highest environmental requirements and scrutiny in the world, and we should be proud of that, because generally we meet those requirements, and it's a big priority for us, as you all know. But it's very difficult when the environmental regulations keep changing in response to perceived community concerns as opposed to science, facts and evidence of our impact. And that shouldn't be an unreasonable expectation for any industry, to want the policy settings and regulation in relation to them based on science, facts and evidence, and not just the occasional bad headline. And the last one I've lifted up there is the implementation of the Minerals Industry Action Plan. Some of you in this room have been involved in that process or have followed the Minerals Industry Action Plan process. Rob Adamson is here today, the chair of the Minerals Industry Action Plan Task Force. This is a document that has been developed over the last 6 to 8 months or so. It's a document that outlines a number of key recommendations needed to improve the policy settings to secure the long-term future of our industry here in New South Wales. Many of the issues and recommendations that it covers are very similar to the issues that I've raised today, and the government and the opposition need to commit to implementing that report's recommendations in full once it is finalised and presented to the government, hopefully within the next few weeks. So they're our key policy priorities for the election, but above all, what we need is a bipartisan approach. It's time for the politics that has affected our industry to end, and we need a bipartisan approach, and that's what we'll be seeking from both sides of politics. So what are we doing to achieve these policies? I just want to touch on some of the things we've been doing and talk about the next steps. I hope some of you have noticed that over the past 3 years we've developed as an organisation a sharper political and campaign edge. And we've done that in response to the need to ensure that our industry is able to defend itself and speak up for itself, to protect and promote itself. We've always been strong on policy engagement, and we continue to be strong on policy engagement, but we have developed a stronger campaign and political advocacy role. because we have to. That's the reality of an industry association these days, particularly one that's in the public spotlight like we are. And what have we been doing there? In terms of our public relations engagement, we're extremely active in the regional media and also here in the Sydney media. We've increased our equivalent earned media buy from around $4.5 million to around $9 million of earned media over the past 12 months, which is a good result for a pretty small outfit like us. And we continue to engage very positively and intensively with media. I think I've done 3 interviews today alone. Advertising campaigns, we are in a constant state of campaigning, and from time to time that involves advertising as well. We've run a number of advertising campaigns targeting Sydney in particular over the past few years, focusing on coexistence with other industries, focusing on our economic contribution. And late last year, to set the scene for the next few weeks, we launched our Hurt Mining, Hurt New South Wales campaign to give our message a sharper focus, to highlight the risks to the New South Wales economy, the risks to families and businesses across the state from policies that hurt mining. And that message was received by the government. They didn't like it that much, but it was received. What do we got next? Community, an area that we really have picked up the ball and ran with, I could say. Our engagement with the Newcastle Knights in the Hunter in particular is something that I'm very proud of, and this morning we announced a continuation of that engagement and partnership with the Knights. It started a few years ago in a very limited way, and last year we expanded our partnership with the Knights, and for the first time last year they played in a special high-vis Miners jersey. You can see Kurt Gidley wearing it there. The Knights have been a very supportive partner of the industry. They're very strong supporters of mining in the Hunter, and our involvement with the Knights goes from strength to strength. And we look forward to continuing that partnership because it is a really good demonstration of the engagement we have as a community with the Hunter. And lastly, our online and social media activation, which has increased significantly over the past few years. Today we went past 6,000 likes on our Facebook page. Is that right, Coralie? Yes. Which is, again, a really good outcome for us. This is a screenshot from our Voice for Mining website. We launched Voice for Mining a few years ago as an online community, as an online network, as an attempt to harness the voices of those who work in the industry, those who support the industry, and try and give people an opportunity to express their views, to counter the views of the very small number of people, the noisy minorities and activists who are active and who like to make their views known and are able to generate noise beyond their size. So we had to counter that with our own Voice for Mining network, and I'm really pleased that the Voice for Mining network has grown to nearly 2,000 people, and we use our network to communicate with those people, to call them to action from time to time, to email MPs, to write letters to the editor, to have a view and to have a voice. And I would encourage all of you, if you are a supporter of the industry and want to help secure the future of the industry, to go to our Voice for Mining website, voiceformining.com.au, because the mobile phone is just as important a piece of equipment for the future of our industry as any drag line, as any haul truck, as any drill rig, because we need to use all methods of communication to make sure that our voices are heard as an industry. So that's what we've been doing there, to basically taking some of the tactics of our opponents and using them against them. And we've had some tremendous success with the Voice for Mining network, including ensuring that submissions to the Planning Assessment Commission on projects are better reflect the community view. The Mount Thorley Warkworth project is a good example, where we had over 900 submissions in support of the project and only about 150 against. And in the wake of the Drayton South decision, we were also able to generate over 800 emails from people concerned about the decision or affected by the decision into the Premier, the Planning Minister and the Minister for Resources. These are very simple ways that all of you can help get the message across to our decision makers, and I would urge you get involved in the Voice for Mining network. So they're some of the things we have been doing, and before I conclude, I want to talk about some of the things we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. And today we've launched a new phase of our campaign to protect and promote the industry, particularly in the context of the state election. This morning we announced that the date for our next Voice for Mining Family Day at Hunter Stadium, a big community event, becoming one of the biggest community events in the Hunter, will be the Knights game against the Panthers on the 28th of March, which just happens to be the day of the state election. So it doesn't matter who wins the election as long as the Knights win, right? But we chose that day for a number of reasons. It's obviously a home game for the Knights, and we need to have a home game for the Knights. But it also is an opportunity for us in the period leading up to the state election to do again what we have done over the past few years with this event, and that is use it as a vehicle to demonstrate just how much community support there is for our industry, particularly in the Hunter, where mining issues are going to be issues in the context of the state election campaign, but more broadly as well. So that was this morning's announcement as part of the kick-off of our pre-election campaign activities. Our online activations, our social media site, our Voice for Mining site will have a new activation from today, which will allow people to email their local MPs directly and their candidates in their electorates to let them know that they support mining, and calling on those MPs and candidates to do so as well. And we'll be increasing our activity there over the next few weeks. Our advertising campaign, Hurt Mining, Hurt New South Wales, will be reactivated within the next few weeks with a particular focus on the Hunter, where over 11,000 coal miners and their families live, and those people and the business people that work in the over 4,000 businesses as part of the mining supply chain in the Hunter have the potential to decide the outcome in a number of seats. There are essentially nine mining seats in the Hunter, and many of those are going to be hotly contested. Seats like Upper Hunter, where with the retirement of George Souris, it's an open seat, 2 local mayors, 2 good candidates running, 4,500 coal miners live in that seat, and over 1,200 local businesses that supply the mines. So when you think about 4,500 coal miners and their families and the people that work in those businesses, that's a pretty big voting block in a tightly contested seat. And that is the case in Cessnock, that's the case in Maitland, that's the case in Port Stephens, and it's the case in Newcastle as well. These are seats where the mining vote does matter, and the mining vote can determine the result. So we're targeting the Hunter, but we're also targeting Western Sydney as well. And you might wonder why we'd be targeting Western Sydney. Well, we've done a lot of work in Western Sydney over the past few years to demonstrate the importance of mining to Western Sydney and to Sydney. But over $1.2 billion of mining money is spent with businesses across Western Sydney in the last financial year. Around 10% of mining spending by our member companies went into Western Sydney in the last financial year, and it was spent with over 1,300 businesses across Western Sydney. And it's one of the big regions for mining activity in terms of mining support, and it's an area which is important to us. And we also understand and know that it's an area of political importance and relevance to the major parties. So we'll be targeting over 20 seats in Western Sydney with our activity, with our advertising, with the message that if you hurt mining, you hurt Western Sydney, because you'll be hurting those businesses that rely on mining for their ongoing health. Seats like Parramatta, where over $400 million was spent by the mining industry in the Parramatta local government area in the last financial year, with over 100 local businesses, and similarly Fairfield, Blacktown, Auburn, and many of the other centres of Western Sydney and South Western Sydney as well. We want to send a very clear and direct message to the politicians, particularly in Western Sydney, that they are part of the mining industry as well, that they represent the mining industry as well, and they need to support the industry and its people. We'll also be direct mailing MPs and candidates to make sure they understand the number of people, the number of businesses that live in their electorates, that are located in their electorates, that are part of the mining supply chain. Our policy wish list will be presented to both sides of politics, and we'll be seeking commitments from them, and we'll be communicating the responses that we receive right across the industry, so that the 20,000 coal miners of New South Wales and their families and friends who go to vote on the 28th of March so that the more than 3,000 metals miners and their families and friends, when they go to vote on the 28th of March, so the more than 10 people that work in the nearly 10,000 businesses across New South Wales that are part of the mining supply chain, so they, their employees and their families know where the parties stand in relation to our industry, what the implications are, and they can make an informed vote on that basis. And as I said, we'll be continuing our advertising campaign as well. So that is a coordinated campaign that we are launching from today to protect and promote our industry and to ensure that we don't get caught up in any silly policy debates or political debates that don't reflect the community view. It's a message we need to send, and it's a preparedness of our industry, of our sector, to stick up for itself and to defend itself, and to no longer accept that we're going to be a political football anymore. Because we've had a tough few years, we all know that, and it's been made tougher by bad policy outcomes. And we've been treated like a political football for too long, and we've allowed ourselves to be treated like a political football for too long. And it has to stop. It has to stop. The price is too high. I mean, it's too high for us. It's too high for our communities. It's too high for our people. And it's too high for the state. It has to stop. And we need to fight back. We need to defend ourselves, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. So we all need to find our voices. We all need to make them heard. And I'm proud to be a voice for this industry, this great industry. This is an industry that has, for over 200 years, made a massive contribution to the development of this state. And we continue to make a massive contribution to this state, to communities right across the state, the people that depend upon us, the many thousands of families and businesses that depend upon us. And I'm proud to fight. I'm proud to fight for those people and for this industry. But I can't do it alone. So I would ask you to join us in this fight, because unless we can all raise our voices together, we won't be heard. We won't be heard. So please, when you see our campaign activity, support it. Please support it, and please support what we are trying to do on your behalf, because I give you this assurance that we won't stop until we secure the policy outcomes that we need to secure the future of this great industry. Thank you.